And welcome back to the New York Jet Fuel podcast. It is March Madness in college basketball, and apparently it's March Madness in football as well. I am your host, Max Marcilla, joined today by one of my favorite guests, Adam Zalanka, a fellow writer, podcaster extraordinaire for New York Jet Fuel. And Adam, March 17th, you think it's not that crazy in the NFL, free agencies. Maybe the big names are already gone. Maybe it's starting to die down a bit. And boom, the Jets trade for the third overall pick. Let's start with that trade because it was just crazy. It didn't come out of nowhere. You kind of knew it was a possibility that the Jets could trade up, but in the terms of when it did happen, it came out of nowhere. Random morning in March.
Yeah.
And I think it had a lot to do with the fact that Kirk Cousins signed with Minnesota. Jets had obviously a plan A, B, C, D, E for what to do with that quarterback position. And you would have to imagine that if plan A fell through, the Cousins situation, this is a plan B. Maybe this trade was part of plan B or plan C. But quickly, before we talk about it, let's just break it down. So the Jets get the third overall pick in this upcoming NFL draft from the Indianapolis Colts. And the Jets gave up quite a lot to do so. They gave up, of course, that sixth overall pick that the Jets had, as well as both their second round picks, one of which was from the Sheldon Richardson trade in 2018, and a second round pick in 2019. So, Adam, let's start. You move up three picks. Why?
Well, you move up three picks because the Denver Broncos, even though they signed Case Keenum, are still sitting there at 5. The Cleveland Browns, who could still very well draft a quarterback in one of their two top 5 picks, are sitting there at 4. You can't get in front of their first overall pick. But that fourth overall pick that Cleveland owns from Houston could also have gone to the drafting of somebody like a Baker Mayfield, maybe to back up the newly acquired Tyrod Taylor next year. And you can make a case that the Colts are the only team in this top 6 not on the verge of getting a new quarterback or making the argument that you could get a new quarterback. You could make the argument the Giants are going to be interested in a quarterback in number 2. Many are saying they should draft Saquon Barkley. Many are saying, you can keep Eli and have him teach Josh Rosen or who have you there for a year or two. Getting to the third overall pick where the Colts were, I like this. I don't think they gave up too much. Let's say thank you one more time for what turned out to be the best trade in the Mike Maccagnan tenure so far as his GM tenure with the New York Jets, and that would be the Sheldon Richardson trade to get not only Jermaine Kearse, who was the second most productive receiver the team had last year, but a second rounder that they now have parlayed into moving up in the first, not just the first round, but the top 5 of this draft, when now more than ever they need to hit on the right quarterback. So that turned out to be an A-plus trade, shipping out the purported locker room problem of Sheldon Richardson to a team that now doesn't even have him. Seattle lost that deal because they didn't even retain him after 1 year. They missed the playoffs and they blew the whole thing up. Sorry, Dad, but they give us Jermaine Kearse. They give us a second rounder that gets parlayed into this astounding trade. And I totally understand what you're saying at the beginning of this podcast, that it's the timing of it all, that you sort of wake up on a Saturday, you think, okay, we've had the very busy first couple days, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, a little bit still happening Friday. Probably football takes a back seat to the round of 32 today in college basketball, and instead we get this major shakeup at the top. I agree with you that this wouldn't have happened if they signed Cousins. And you can argue in the comments all you want of would Cousins have been better than Teddy Bridgewater, or did the Jets even have a chance, an outside shot at signing the guy? But if you have Kirk Cousins, you do not need to develop the quarterback of your future, and you can use the 6th pick to do anything else. You could trade back if you want with that pick. You could draft an offensive lineman, a defender. You can see if Saquon Barkley falls to 6. It would not have been as much as exciting as what has happened today. But then again, the exciting thing in that scenario would have been having Kirk Cousins brought in. What is he, just shy of his 30th birthday? You get several solid years out of Cousins. And again, the debate, all you want to do with the debate, I don't I don't really care. What's done now is done. Teddy Bridgewater's in the house. We'll talk more about the free agency week 1 in a little bit. Teddy Bridgewater's in the house, and we can see the Jets angling to draft one of their desired quarterback prospects with this trade.
So here's the thing, and just to fill our listeners in, when Adam apologized to his dad, that's because Mr. Zalanka is a Seahawks fan. So
you all know this.
Everybody
knows this.
He wasn't saying sorry, Dad, because he has a big emotional attachment to Sheldon Richardson. I think he feels bad that the Seahawks are blowing up what was the best defense in football for a couple of years, and we could do another show on that because that team is an interesting team. But not as interesting as the Jets, Adam. And here's the thinking behind this trade. In my opinion, if you're the Jets, you did give up a lot, and you were going to have to in a draft where there are 3, 4, maybe even 5 first-round quarterbacks, and a lot of people think that these could be franchise quarterbacks. You're going to have to give up a lot to move up at any point in the draft, especially in the top 5. So the Jets gave up a lot. You can't say they didn't. It was a lot. 3 second-round picks. I mean, that is a lot. But here's the counterpoint to that. The Jets haven't drafted well in the second round. I mean, True. Christian Hackenberg, who, by the way, once the Jets take a quarterback, which seems pretty much inevitable, he's going to be the 4th quarterback on the depth chart. And it seems unlikely that he will be on the roster come September. It seems pretty much impossible that he'll even take a snap as a member of the Jets. But Christian Hackenberg, Devin Smith, I mean, outside of Marcus May last year, the Jets have not drafted well in the second round. Geno Smith before that. So, you sacrifice those 3 second-round picks, and what it all comes down to is hitting on this pick. And Adam, my first reaction to this trade, and I know I reached out to you, I said, this will be the pick that will define Mike Maccagnan's legacy. Because as the GM of the Jets, he's made some good moves. You mentioned that Sheldon Richardson trade. Getting Jermaine Kearse was a good move. Getting rid of all the expensive players in the big salary cap purge and still fielding a competitive product. I think that was a good job. But when it comes down to Mike Maccagnan's legacy, it seems like it's going to be pretty much this pick. I mean, the rebuild, the process of the rebuild, getting the draft picks, signing the young players, building up that young core on defense and on offense. It all boils down to, can they get the quarterback? This is their chance to get the quarterback. This, I would guess, is Mike Maccagnan's last chance to get his quarterback, because if this quarterback doesn't pan out 4 or 5 years down the line, Maccagnan's not the GM. So this pick will define Mike Maccagnan's legacy. And for that reason, I think it's okay to mortgage these second round picks. Again, they didn't do great in the second round. The Jets fielded a competitive product last year. So yeah, they're losing a couple picks, but they have a lot of money. And by not signing Kirk Cousins, they're going to have a lot of money next year and probably the year after that. So the Jets are going to field a competitive team this year. It's all about the quarterback play. And we knew that going into this year. This trade just solidifies this team is going to go for a quarterback.
Let me tell you why I totally agree with you about Maccagnan. It comes in the same year that his contract gets extended alongside Todd Bowles' contract. So he gets a couple years, supposedly, and they could still choose to terminate that or fire him at whatever point. But it was this vote of confidence, this vote of at least, if not confidence, consistency. But more to the point, being able to draft a quarterback 3rd overall papers over the failed Hackenberg pick. The byproduct of this trade, especially if they do draft a quarterback, which like almost 100% guarantee will happen at this point, is that Christian Hackenberg won't be on this roster in August or possibly in June. Who knows when they'll cut him? But you can make fans forget about how you swung and missed on Hackenberg if you get this pick right, and that's, to your point, exactly why this is going to determine his legacy. And the Jets must feel confident in free agency, and again, we'll talk about free agency in a bit, that the players they've signed this week, from Bridgewater on down at the other positions of need, allowed them to forfeit a couple picks in this draft, if you would call it forfeiting. They don't need to fill in as many needs. They still have needs up and down the roster, if you ask me, but they don't need to fill in as many needs with the couple of second rounders that they've now given up to Indianapolis.
The most important thing for the Jets is the quarterback. And if you're going to sacrifice some players at other positions, again, they had money and they signed. I mean, you look at the positions of need: linebacker, cornerback, offensive line. With Forte gone, you could argue they needed another running back. I mean, those are the guys they picked up. Yeah. So they've done a good job of filling the holes through free agency. Yeah, maybe you're right. Maybe it is worth giving up those picks. The other thing I will say before I want to talk quickly about who could be available to the Jets at 3 is, if you're the Jets, and this is pure speculation right now, but it seems like Mike Maccagnan and the Jets really like at least 2, probably 3 quarterbacks, because you don't give up this much for a chance at your guy. If the Jets, just for example, if they say Josh Allen's their guy, and Mike Maccagnan says, I love Josh Allen, let's get him. And they trade up to 3, they give away all these picks, and Josh Allen goes 1 or 2, and the Jets don't have him. That's not good for Maccagnan. So, again, this is speculation, but I would have to guess that Maccagnan really likes 2, maybe 3 of the quarterbacks, to where he could say, if I can get one of Darnold, Mayfield, Rosen, I think he'd be happy. And I think if you pull the trigger, if you're Maccagnan, it's because you're confident that you are guaranteed at 3 as opposed to 6. You are guaranteed to get a guy you love, whoever that is.
It's such an interesting and fascinating draft year, because it's not a year where the top 5 picks are going to be offensive and defensive linemen. It's all of these quarterbacks that maybe their value in the future won't justify a top 5 selection, but that's what's happening with quarterbacks these years, especially last year when teams traded up for Pat Mahomes and Deshaun Watson. They were projected for months in mock drafts to be low 20s, or not low 20s, sorry, low first round, around the high 20s, mid 20s, and they got taken up, if I remember right, 10th and 12th. 9th and 12th, something like that. Because
top half of the draft for sure.
Top half. So it's all these quarterbacks, and now I'm gonna be a little bit contrarian. I threw this out to Matt Barbado when I was talking to him earlier today, and he called it would be an immense disappointment if this happened. But in addition to the quarterback strategy that you're describing, where you have to imagine the Jets like 2 or more, probably 3 or more of these quarterbacks at the top of the draft, you also have a supremely talented running back named Saquon Barkley, who is better, in my humble opinion, than anybody they have on the roster right now at that position. Better than Bilal Powell, better than the newly signed Isaiah Crowell, who would come in and be a starter, who apparently has this connection now to Curtis Martin. If you're reading about these stories where he's playing chess with Curtis Martin, and he idolized Martin growing up, was a Jets fan from New York before moving to Pennsylvania. I don't know. I think that if you like, let's say the number's 2 for quarterbacks, and you move up to 3rd, you like your 2 quarterbacks, and on the off chance that those 2 quarterbacks go to the Browns and Giants, Saquon Barkley is available to you. And as important as the need is for quarterback, would you rather take Saquon Barkley, or would you rather take a guy you're not entirely psyched about? Let's say, I don't know, Josh Allen. Josh Allen, there are flaws in him, and there's also people expect a high ceiling. People love how prototypically sized he is, from hands to just build at 6'6". But there's also questions of accuracy. So I'm just using him as an example. I can't purport to know what the Jets feel about any of their prospects. But let's say they really like Darnold, Rosen. Darnold and Rosen are off the board. And you have the chance to either draft Saquon Barkley or a quarterback that you're not as psyched about, like a guy like Allen. Let's just throw that out there. I'd say go with Barkley and find another way to draft a quarterback you want to develop. You can develop a quarterback who's picked 60th or 70th instead of 3rd. And it's overdone to call a running back prospect a generational type prospect, a once in a generation, because we've had several years in a row now of guys like Leonard Fournette and Ezekiel Elliott who blow people away, whether that's in college, in the combine. Barkley, in particular, his measurements at the combine, we shouldn't buy too much into that stuff, just flabbergasted everybody. the size of his legs and how much he could bench in addition to how fast he's running. And you don't need to rely on measurables to know what happened at Penn State this year and the year before that. So, Max, am I entirely crazy to say that Barkley is still an option for the Jets at 3 in this very specific little scenario I've carved out?
It is a very specific scenario. It's a realistic one. I mean, let's not kid ourselves. There is definitely a chance that the Jets only love 2 of these prospects, and yeah, it could happen. But here's the thing, Adam: you don't trade up and give all those picks for a running back. You talk about generational talent, and I would argue that, and I've said this year after year: Ezekiel Elliott, Leonard Fournette, generational talents, and I still think Saquon Barkley is the best out of those 3, the best prospect out of those 3. But here's the thing: who was the best rookie running back last year? It wasn't Leonard Fournette. Yeah. It was Alvin Kamara, who was the best running back in the class. Even a guy like Kareem Hunt for Kansas City. There's another late round guy. With running backs, it's easier to find a diamond in the rough running back than it is to find a quarterback. Now, that's not to look. There are quarterbacks taken later in the draft. Of course, Tom Brady, Russell Wilson, that do become stars. But if you're looking at the average player, an above average running back, it's much easier to find an above average running back in the 3rd round than it is to find an above average quarterback, even after the first 10 picks. So if you're the Jets, you got to take a quarterback that you love. That's why I think they only made this trade, because they are guaranteed at 3 as opposed to 6 to get that guy that they love. So real quick, Adam, before we move on to talk about free agency for the last part of this podcast, how would you rate the soon-to-be rookie quarterbacks in this draft class?
I would go Rosen, Mayfield, Darnold, Allen, and then the next group is probably Lamar Jackson and Mason Rudolph at tier 2. I did not get to watch very much of the combine. I know everybody sort of measured out pretty similar, and I believe Sam Darnold didn't throw. So I'm still basing my personal rankings off of what I remember from the college season and the season before that. And I still carry a little bit of an anti-Sam Darnold bias for how not safe he was, how unsafe he was with the football, not just in throwing interceptions, but fumbling left and right multiple times a game against inferior competition like Western Michigan. Josh Rosen doesn't really, the negatives on him don't really scare me at this point. I like Mayfield every time I watch Mayfield, despite his size. Size doesn't bother me here with Mayfield, or if you've got the sort of Russell Wilson, Johnny Manziel kind of height and the way he can will his team to win. I hate to rely too much on intangibles, but just watching the guy's tape excites me, and I think Mayfield's a winner. Then I would say probably Darnold, Allen. Right after that. Those are my personal rankings. What about you?
I would pretty much say the same. I would go Rosen and Baker Mayfield 1A, 1B. I think they're very different prospects, but I think both of them can have very good NFL careers. Darnold, I would say, rounds out my top 3. It's a little tougher just because Darnold only played a couple years, and you're right, he was turnover prone, and it's a little bit more of a risk than the other 2, in my opinion. I don't like Josh Allen at 3. I think Josh Allen can be a really good quarterback, but he needs to go to a place where he's not the starter year 1. I think he needs to sit behind a guy. Could it be Eli Manning? Who knows? But I think that would be the best situation for him. I think Lamar Jackson actually might be more pro ready than Josh Allen, if you ask me today. But I think that Josh Allen in the right situation would be better than Lamar Jackson. But with all that being said, if I'm the Jets, I'm looking at those top 3, and more specifically Rosen and Baker Mayfield. So moving on to the free agency portion of the Jet Fuel podcast, let's talk about what the Jets did. Let's start with, how about we go to non-quarterback talk, because that doesn't happen too much. The biggest signing the Jets made was former Los Angeles Rams cornerback Trumaine Johnson, giving him over $26 million a year, and he earned that money. He was one of the better cornerbacks. Let's see, you got me saying quarterbacks.
Yeah,
Trumaine Johnson was one of the better cornerbacks last year and the year before that in the league. He was really good with Los Angeles, especially this year, as they kind of turned around the trajectory of the franchise. I think that's a great signing. It's a lot of money, but the Jets had nothing at cornerback. So they signed Trumaine Johnson before they signed Morris Claiborne. So it is worth noting the Jets had nothing at cornerback, so they did have to make a move. I think this was a smart move. Also on the defensive side of the ball, Avery Williamson, the former Titan, signing him instead of Demario Davis. I like it. I think Williamson is a good 3-4 inside linebacker. And I think for as good of a year as Demario Davis had, I think that might be his ceiling. And I think Williamson still has room to grow. He's a couple years younger. I like that signing. And then on the offensive side of the ball, Isaiah Crowell. It's a fine signing. You have Bilal Powell. You have to figure Crowell will get in the mix. And Spencer Long kind of bolstering the offensive line. So overall, I thought outside of Trumaine Johnson, because that was a big name signing, the Jets did a good job keeping their guys around and getting these value free agents at good price tags and maybe some not household names, but especially Avery Williamson. I'm big on that one. What are your thoughts on those four specifically before we talk about quarterbacks to wrap up the show?
Well, I agree that Trumaine Johnson is the top signing of the four of them. And giving them the ability to re-sign Morris Claiborne on another 1-year deal to sort of say, here's one more shot for you, and you don't have to cover the top receivers in our division or whoever that actually is anymore with the teams that you have in that division. There are no good receivers anymore. But the top receivers on our schedule. You're going to come back as a number 2 corner. That's good for Claiborne and good for the Jets, which suddenly makes a guy like Buster Skrine more natural in the nickel, and the depth that they have, even though the rookies they drafted last year didn't play. They're still in the room. Justin Burris is still in the room. You need some of those guys to be on kick return coverage anyway. So I like the Trumaine Johnson signing. He's the best cornerback they've had since Revis's prime, if you ask me. And they didn't overpay. They paid him what he was worth. And when you have the when you have the cap money, you can make moves like that. So my issue with the rest of the signings, and this does harken back to a column I wrote, a little guest column coming back for Jet Fuel called "Jets Have Addressed Needs But Haven't Fixed Them in Free Agency." I'll say that again because I stumbled a little bit. The Jets have addressed their needs, many of their needs, but they have not fixed them so far in free agency. Not entirely. I'll get to why that's true for quarterbacks later when we talk about quarterbacks again. I don't think Isaiah Crowell is a fantastic signing. He's had, I believe, 6 100-yard rushing games in 5 seasons or something of that, 4 seasons. Playing with Duke Johnson, fair enough, but he never jumped off the page with me playing for the Browns. And you don't have to be very good to jump off the page if you've got a Browns uniform on, or jump off the screen watching a game or a tape. I don't see exactly how threatening the running game is going to be if you pair Powell with Crowell. I don't know who starts technically if you want to care too much about the starter by name, the nominal starter. Spencer Long worries me a little bit because he's been hurt for basically his whole NFL career. And even though Ryan Jensen, the former Ravens center, got a lot more money going to the Buccaneers than the Jets paid with Long, the Jets sort of got a bargain signing on Long, on, to your point, Williamson over Demario Davis, Crowell over a guy like Carlos Hyde that might have been available. I feel a little blah about these guys. I'm going to have to see them prove it to me. I got to watch more Avery Williamson to get to the level of where you are of liking that signing. I got to see that Long can. I mean, anybody's an upgrade over Wesley Johnson at center. And that was the biggest hole on the line that the Jets had to address this year. So I'm glad they did something about it. But Spencer Long might not have been my choice. And I feel like for the team with the most cap room that the Jets were 5 days ago, I don't know why they had to make a couple of little bargain signings like Crowell and Long instead of going out and getting a guy like Ryan Jensen at center instead. He went to the Buccaneers for something like $8 million a year.
Mm-hmm.
So
here's what I'll say to that, Adam. And
yeah,
look, you're gonna have to go back and watch these guys to get a better feel of them. And I don't think Crowell was a great signing, but I think he's a reliable backup. However you want to slice it, with 1-2 for Powell. I think that they're fine value signings. You see the other day the other year, the Jets went out and spent a lot of money on the big names and had to blow it up after a year. So, or after 2 years. So it's a different strategy. And you know what? Let's see it. Now, the bigger moves came at quarterback. So to wrap up the podcast, the Jets brought back Josh McCown and Teddy Bridgewater on 1-year deals. The Jets reportedly told McCown that he would be he would enter camp as their starter, which don't buy any stock into that because it's just on paper. I'm intrigued by these signings for a couple of reasons. Number one, Teddy Bridgewater is kind of a low risk investment because he still could turn out to be a good NFL quarterback. So I like that. To bring back McCown in addition to Bridgewater is interesting because you have to figure if the Jets do draft a quarterback, there's not really going to be a place for McCown unless there's an injury. So if the Jets are content with spending their $10 million to bring back Josh McCown as a veteran mentor and leader on the team, I mean, that's their call, and I think it could be worth it. But I was a little intrigued by that one. But overall, what I think these signings means mostly is the Jets are going to give this rookie quarterback that they almost inevitably will draft, they're going to give him a position to take a job. And if he doesn't, they'll give him a position to learn from it. And I think the Jets really are doing the right things this offseason. And it really all boils down to, will it pan out? Will getting the value bargain guys instead of the big names like they did a couple years ago, will that work out? Will paying the veteran quarterback to mentor Bridgewater and a potential rookie, will that pan out? And I think it definitely could. I think the Jets are doing the right things.
I think it feels like the right thing. It's interesting.
You don't get that feeling a lot with the Jets.
Right. The Jets would get stuff right. I'm just playing around on Pro Football Reference to look at the one season that Bridgewater played 16 games, which of course was 2015, after his rookie year, but before his injury. And he was okay. He didn't throw for 4,000 yards, but he led a Vikings team to 11-5 and a playoff appearance, 14 touchdowns to 9 picks. Not so bad for a sophomore campaign where you had, believe that was last year, Adrian Peterson ran for that team too. So you didn't have to be a pass first team. And they looked like the real deal. And the Vikings obviously their nucleus, their defense, everything that they've got going for them, they are the real deal. But Teddy Bridgewater, I'm just glad that both of these guys came on 1-year deals for different reasons. Josh McCown's going to be 40 very soon. He's not long for this league. And the difference between him and Ryan Fitzpatrick is that Josh McCown is the mentor. And Ryan Fitzpatrick was, unfortunately, the guy who had a career year in his 30s and then played hardball in the summer, which is just, we don't need to go relitigate that. But point is, Bridgewater, on the other hand, had to be a 1-year deal because you still can't be certain about that knee. No matter what the Vikings tried to do in December to throw him into a game toward the end of the regular season in place of Keenum, you can't long term predict what Bridgewater's knee is going to do or feel like or look like next November if he's let's say he's the starter and the Jets are doing fine. And does it get sore quickly? Is it going to bother him the rest of his career? It was that gruesome of an injury that the 1-year deal had to be a 1-year deal. You're right that it does place whoever gets drafted into a cozy situation. They don't have to be rushed in right away, but they still have the opportunity to win that job if they're good enough for it. So it's good to me. I think we just got to wait and see who that quarterback is, and we'll get to spend the next 6 weeks debating up and down, left and right, who makes the most sense or who's the best idea or how we should rank our best options for this team.
It will certainly be interesting to watch the Jets compete this year because they are fielding a team that can compete, as well as a team that will, they hope, be competitive for plenty of years to come. So that'll wrap up this edition of the Jet Fuel podcast. We were very, very happy we were able to talk to you about Jets football on possibly the craziest March day that we've seen, at least since the day the Jets signed Revis, but that was crazy for a different reason. It's been a wild day, a wild week of free agency, and I want to thank you all for following New York Jet Fuel for our coverage on the Jets. So for our crew at Jet Fuel and Adam Zalanka, I am Max Marcilla. Thank you very much for listening to the Jet Fuel podcast.